Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live program for technical sales professionals and technical sales leaders. And today we have a very special guest, actually a return guest. And I happen to have a book in my hand called Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder, How Buyer Enablement Drives Digital Sales and Shortens the Sales Cycle. And of course, we are joined by the gentleman who wrote that book, Mr. Garin Hess. He's also the founder and CEO of a company called Consensus. Many of you may be familiar with them. Garin, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being here. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on the show, Chris. And brownie points for you for having a copy of the book on hand.
Well, I mean, look, so I have to, be fully, I'm going to make people a little envious. I do have a signed copy that you probably recall sending to me. And it is a brilliant read. By the way, we've already had somebody say hello, Shamil Turner. I hope I'm saying that right.
Hey, Shamil.
Gave you a shout out on the book. Jennifer Rutherford as well. Folks, if you do care to say hello, please feel free to do so. We don't actually know who's out there. We don't see who's out there. So if you do care to say hello, or if you have any questions for Garin or myself, please feel free to do so. Garin, and Garin, as you may recall, I like to say that these conversations are by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And so I'd like to do something that may be a little bit sort of, off script and unexpected.
Sure.
I'm just going to poke around the book a little bit, and I'm going to pick out some words or some phrases. I'm going to invite you to elaborate on some of those ideas. I think that might be a fun way to sort of kick around some of these ideas. Now, before I get into that, though, I would love to just ask you, what inspired you to write the book?
Well, we could talk a long time about that, so I'll try to figure out how to make this short. So back in the day, so our company that I run was called Demo Chimp.
I distinctly remember Demo Chimp.
And so I had some experiences. First of all, I'll tell you a couple of experiences so we don't spend the whole time on this. But when we started using our own demo automation platform for ourselves, it was in February of 2014. And at the time, there were only 3 or 4 people in our company. And
wow.
I was, founder and CEO, plus the SDR, plus the salesperson, and everything.
You were doing it all.
I was doing everything. And I made this series of calls out, trying to figure out how to use this. And I called and at the time we were selling into kind of smaller software companies. And I said, hey, you're the head of sales and marketing. We have this demo application thing. Do you experience this problem? And they said, yeah, we do. I said, would you like to get on a call? They said, yes. This was on a Monday. I said, before that call, would you be willing to watch a little demo? So I sent this link to the demo, and between that Monday and that Wednesday, he watched it, and he shared it with 11 other stakeholders. Wow. And all these notifications came in. And when that Wednesday came, I got on the call, and all 12 of them were on the call.
Wow.
And I just thought, and this will sound weird because it's probably not true, but my thought that ran through my head was, I don't think this has ever happened in the history of sales in the worord. Like on the first call, you get all the decision makers on the call.
Amazing. Yeah, it's amazing.
And at that moment, I had to pause, and I remember calling a friend of mine after that and saying, I got to get together with lunch with you. He was another entrepreneur. And at lunch, I said, I'm not sure this is about demos. I think it's more about all these different people that get involved in the decision-making process. And that was the first time I really started thinking about, wow, there's something very interesting going on here. So the other thing I'll just share is, in 2015, I sat down, I've been very frustrated about how difficult, how painful and complex, and how long it takes to buy enterprise software. I mean, this is the main pain point that we're trying to solve. And I sat down one day and I locked myself in my office and I asked myself the question, if I were a buyer of enterprise software, what would be the perfect way to buy? How, if I could buy in the best, if I could design the perfect way to buy, what would it be? And I literally spent 7 or 8 hours thinking about and designing out, and I still have a lot of these plans, and a lot of them kind of still direct a lot of our product thinking consensus. But it was really at that day, it hit me. I'm like, the big thing here is buyers want to buy differently than how we all want to sell to them. And if that's true, I got to change our company's name. So we changed it to Consensus, because the idea is how do we use technology to help all the different stakeholders get kind of pointed in the same direction when they all come at it from different angles. And it was that year I started doing the research in 2015. And I really got going on the research in about 2018. And this book didn't get published till 2020. So there was a lot of stuff that kind of came later in that time frame, but that's kind of how it all came together. So those are a couple of things.
That's when it really solidified. And I want to get to some things in the book. There is one thing that I remember here. It's one of the first things that I remember hearing you say in one of your talks that really stuck with me. And it's when you said, and I don't know if this was a one-on-one or you were speaking to a group. I don't recall, but you said, salespeople always think that they close the deal, but they don't actually close the deal. The person who closes the deal is the individual, the internal champion, right? When the deal is closed, you're not in the room.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And this was one of the fundamental problems with technical sales and sales of all kinds that involve more than one decision maker. And that is that you can't close the deal. And I have in the book kind of facetiously a t-shirt that sometimes, I close deals, or I'm a closer, coffees for closers, that kind of thing. And the thing is that in reality, you never get to sign the contract, and it's always the buyer that closes it. And they're the ones that are actually over there selling on your behalf. Exactly. And it's really about how do we facilitate them? How do we help them? How do we coach them? How do we equip them in a way that they can do that effectively? Because they're very enthusiastic. Our champions that do this for us are very enthusiastic, but they're like puppy dogs that want to cross the road. They want to get the ball on the other side, but they don't know there's a lot of cars whizzing by, and they're super enthusiastic, and they're likely to get nailed. You know what I mean? But they don't know it. And so we have to coach them through that process so they know what they're getting into, where the landmines are, where the friction is, where the resistance is going to happen. And that's really what Buyer Enablement's all about. That we understand that path that they're going to go through, and we carefully guide them through that process.
Yeah. As I like to say, we sell for a living. Buyers don't buy for a living. Right?
Exactly.
So it's on us to help them through that process.
And that's why it's harder for them, because they don't do it for a living, right?
Exactly.
Selling is very hard, but we do it for a living. They don't they don't do it hardly at all. And so it's much harder for them to be successful at it. It's a one-time shot they're putting their neck on the line for.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, let me say hi to Frank Ivey. He's been a regular attendee to these conversations. Frank, it's good to see you.
Hi, Frank.
So Garin, let's start picking this apart. Earlier this morning, literally I was thumbing through your book and looking through some of my favorite chapters. And you've already touched on one of the first things that I was going to ask you, but I'm just going to go ahead and put this on the table again and see if there's anything else that comes to mind. In your introduction, you say, take charge of buying, let go of selling. And now you've already touched on this a little bit, but when you hear that repeated back to you, does anything sort of strike a chord as sort of the driver, the why?
Well, I think one of the key things with that in particular is that as salespeople, we think we're there to be in charge of our side, what's happening on our side of the table, and that the buyer is in charge of what happens on their side of the table. And the reality is it's very different from that, meaning that on the other side of the table, one, they don't know what they're doing, and two, they need some leadership, right? And so if you think about it, they are in charge of the selling. They have to go sell to the other stakeholders, and you're just there to help them. And you're in charge of the buying process because you understand it. You've guided so many people through it. It's like that river guide or whatever it is. I liken it in the book to somebody taking you through the Amazon jungle, right? You don't want to be walking through that with somebody who's been through there the first time, but somebody who's been there in an experienced way. They're going to know exactly where to take you. And so you're in charge of the buying process because you know what it's all about. They're in charge of selling because they've got to go sell to the other stakeholders in the buying group. And the reality is we don't often get access to those stakeholders, right? There's all this research that's been around for years about how little amount of time we get to spend with any of those buyers. Our champion alone, let alone all the other stakeholders that have to get involved, which now there are 11 to 20 in a typical B2B deal. So it's really about letting go of selling and understanding the buying process in such a way that you can equip that champion to go talk to and address every single one of the key stakeholders that has to get involved.
Equip and enable is what comes to mind, right? Equip and enable. There's another thing that immediately comes to mind for me as I hear you say that, because I think some people who might hear that might think, well, gee, Garin, it sort of sounds like you're saying that we should be forcing the issue or pressing or pursuing our agenda. I know that that's not what you're saying. The very first subsection in chat, really what's chapter 1 is, it's not about us. So to me, we immediately have to caveat what you just said with, in their best interest, in the best interest of the organization and what they are trying to achieve. It's not about us. I know that resonates with you. Do you care to elaborate on that point?
Yeah, for sure. There's a quote, I won't get this right because I don't have it right in front of me, but in the book, I can't remember who said it either, but I think it might have been, well, anyway, I won't guess on this, but she said, we have to put our need to close the deal at the service of the need of the buyer to get, have the right kind of outcome. And here's the thing that's so interesting about it is it's very counterintuitive that as soon as we let go of that need to close the deal, we are much more likely to close it.
It's so true.
Yeah, so it's the old adage, if you try to hold a butterfly, you have to hold it very, the old 38 Special song, hang on loosely, or hold on. What's that old song?
Yeah, hold on loosely. Yeah, hold on loosely.
Yeah, it's like that's really how, and you have to let go of the need to close so that you can be an effective buying coach. And that's my, one of my big things. I try to persuade our profession to think of ourselves as buying coaches rather than salespeople. And if you let that go and you really do put their best interest in mind, you're going to close much more often because you'll instantly 100%. Build trust. You're going to be more helpful. You're going to add value in every touch point, and all of that.
Yeah, really well said. And one of the things that I like to say, it's not that people don't want real solutions to real problems. They just don't want to be sold to. So the moment I feel as though I'm being sold, even if you have the right solution to the problem that I want to solve the most, the moment I feel as though I'm being sold to, I'm going to shut down, right? That's right. So to your point, the moment we put our need and desire to close the deal secondary, right?
Yeah, and the buyers sense this. Like, they know this. They're not stupid. They know if you just want to sell them, and they know that you want to help them. And there's a section in there about how buyers want to be educated, not sold to. And I have a table in the book that kind of says, here's what it looks like when you're trying to sell them. Here's what it looks like when you're just trying to educate them. Because once you once you really get into the mode of I'm here to educate, teach, guide, coach, right? And just get in that mode in every engagement, whether it's email or chat or in a phone call or whatever, then everything is so much easier for them and for you. And honestly, it's a lot funner to be a professional that way. And a lot of people do this naturally. I think what the big aha moment is, even for those who do this naturally, is that you've got to understand all the different stakeholders around the buying group in such a way that you can educate that champion about all of those before they encounter it, right? So much of buyer enablement is about preempting, understanding what could happen, what's likely to happen, because you've seen it before. And so you need to educate them so that when they go to sell, they are educating the other stakeholders, right? So if we're talking about they don't want to be sold to by us, well, their stakeholders that they have to go sell to don't want to be sold to by them. They just want to be educated. So it's got to go all the way downstream.
100%. One of the thoughts that comes to mind is motive is transparent, right?
Yeah.
Motive is transparent. And what I love about what you just said is it's not just about having the right attitude and the right motive, but you also have to have the right skills and the ability to inform, to educate, to navigate, right? There's two sides of the coin. But by the way, and Garin, I think you'll appreciate this. So Frank Tisolano, he runs pre-sales for Kaseya. His comment, and Frank, nice to hear from you, by the way. That's why statistics show that buyers get more value from sales engineers than salespeople. No disrespect to salespeople, right? Unfortunately, they are motivated and incentivized in ways sometimes to be too focused on just closing the deal. So, and I think that's why this is so powerful. Frank, nice to see you. So let's build on.
Comment on Frank's comment,
please.
There's a very interesting quote in some Gartner research that says that what buyers want most is content that is rich in technical detail and not easily faked.
Like who is that's that? Good.
That's sales engineers. I mean, that's solution consultants all the way. And why do they say not easily faked? Well, because too many buyers have been in situations where too much information has been easily faked. By whom, So again, not to bash on sales, but it's definitely true to Frank's point that the buyers want the real stuff. And this goes to all kinds of content that buyers want in the buying process. At the very beginning, and this is one of the challenges between the transition between marketing and sales, or sort of the friction that you get between marketing and sales. And by sales, when I say sales, I mean the broader technical selling team, including solution consulting. But marketing quite often has skin deep information that it gets consumed, and it's appropriate quite often at the early stages of the buying process. But once they get into a little bit farther along in that buying process, buyers, and it doesn't take very long really, buyers want this content that's rich in technical detail that cannot be easily faked. And one of the big friction points is that marketers don't want to give it to them, and salespeople often can't get a hold of sales engineering fast enough to get the buyers what they want. So it's this big challenge. Buyers want to move faster through the process, but they just can't get the information that they want. And so this is really what it's all about, is just understanding what the buyers want well enough, and then aligning your whole organization, including in marketing and sales, and then even in CS, because the buyers don't care where they are on the journey. We only think of these stages because we run a business, but the buyers are just trying to do their jobs. So anyway, that's just a point I wanted to make, which is just that the friction between marketing and technical sales is often a challenge because the buyers want to move faster through that process, and it's just our organizations that are slowing them down.
The irony of what you're saying, and I think it's so true, the irony of what you're saying is that the better job marketing does at queuing up well-qualified leads, the bigger problem we have because it's so difficult to bring in the right expert, sales engineer, solution architect, et cetera, right? And now we've got this pool of well-qualified leads that are sincerely interested because marketing did such a good job of putting the potential, the value out there.
Yep.
But people are going, well, wait a minute, where's, to your point, where's the meaningful information that can't be faked?
Yeah,
right?
I want the meaty content. Yeah.
So before, and you've got a chapter specifically on this. I'm looking at this. Chapter 3 is what buyers want. But before we get there, there's a chapter on how buyers think. And one of the things that you talk about is the emotional ROI. Can we touch? Can we pick this apart just a little bit? Because I think and we talked about both having the right attitude and the skills. I think part of that skill set is understanding how buyers think and understanding this idea of emotional ROI. Do you mind unpacking that a little bit?
Well, it occurred to me when I was doing this research that one of the things we all know that buyers want is the financial ROI, right? And so that's kind of a given. And quite often sales engineering gets involved with that process. But the thing that is less obvious, but is more important, is this idea of emotional ROI. And what I mean by that is there is a subconscious, sometimes conscious, but it's, I'd say 90% of the time, subconscious calculation going on in the buyer's mind and heart about whether or not everything else set aside, it is going to be worth the emotional risk that they are going to take to even investigate and then try to procure and then try to implement and adopt and implement, truly bring a massive change in the organization. And I think that there are a lot of things to think about in this regard that are not usually considered consciously on either the seller's side or the buyer's side. And a lot of times on the sales side, we're just focused on what is the value prop? What problems are you trying to solve in the business? How can we solve that? Does the financial ROI make sense? Does the value prop make sense? Does the use case work? Do we have everything lined up to be able to do this effectively? And that's all important. I'm not saying it isn't, but one of the things that will kill the deal is if your champion just doesn't have the energy.
Right.
And they may feel like I have the energy now, but I won't in a couple months, or I don't have it now, but I will in a couple months. And that could be the very reason that they're postponing. Has nothing to do whether they can get budget, whether you've got the right product and solution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are a couple of different ways that I like to advocate thinking about this. One of them is this thing I call the 5 Ps, which is that buyers buy for emotional reasons. And we're talking, when I'm talking buyers, yes, I'm talking about the champion, but I'm also talking about all the other stakeholders that get involved, right? When you've got these 11 to 20 stakeholders, each one of them has an emotional reason for either getting on board or resisting or torpedoing the project, right? Yeah. And sometimes we'll see the politics come into this. So the 5 Ps are basically prestige, preservation, pain, pleasure, and profitability. So, I mean, just to briefly unpack each one of them, prestige is all about, hey, I could get promoted and get more seen, have more influence in the organization, or maybe this will really be an opportunity if I bring in this technology into the organization that I can put it on my resume and this could advance my career. On the preservation side, it's quite often about, I need to do this to keep my job, or it's just how do I protect my department, for example, from a lot of times in sales engineering doesn't get quite the influence inside the organization that we'd like. And so it might be, hey, we need to prove to the organization that my department's relevant, for example. On the pain side, it's really about just avoiding, could be painful usability, could be painful process, could be anything that is work related could be work related, but you've also got painful things that might be happening in their own lives that kind of go along with some of these other things. Like, I haven't been promoted for a long time. I have this painful feel. I've emotional pain of feeling I'm not progressing in my career. So there's different aspects of that. And then of course there's pleasure. Oh, this is just going to be so much easier to use. My job's going to be easier. This will be more efficient. It's just going to be more enjoyable to work this way.
Right.
And then, finally the profitability, which is, there's the aspect of the financial ROI, but there's just the profitability of the personal profitability. Hey, I'm going to get promoted and make more money, and so on. And so there are these different aspects of why people buy. And I think that what they're constantly weighing, and again, this is usually subconscious, is emotional risk. And a lot of times these things come out, but if you look at some of these different 5 P's and you think about them in risk, it's risk to predictability and risk to stability. Sometimes that devil is just easier to deal with than the devil you don't, right? So let's just keep the status quo. Yeah. Sometimes it's peer reputation. I could try to bring on this new vendor, but if I don't do a good job, well, then my neck's on the line. And then it could also just be workload and current projects you've got. Just, is it practical? Can I even do this? Because most of us are kind of overworked, and true for most of our champions that we engage with. And then finally, you've got the kind of this work-life balance at home, because whatever amount of work you've got, the champion has on their plate at the time, you're going to add to it. And so these are all the things that are going on in their minds and hearts. And one of the questions I often ask, technical sales teams is, are you having a conversation about these things with the buyer? Because these are real factors. And what's happening is they're asking the question like this in a subconscious way. Does the emotional value, that, let's say, the promotion I'm going to get, or the prestige I'm going to get, or the usability gains, or the pleasure that I'm going to get from bringing this on, does that outweigh the cost that it's going to take, the toll it's going to take on me, on my family, because I'm going to have to spend some late nights, I'm going to have to work some weekends to get this implemented, right? All of this. And I have found that the most effective way to deal with this is to bring it out in the open. And the way that you do it is you bring clarity to the amount of effort it's going to take to both procure and implement a solution. So the more clarity you bring, then they can make a calculated risk. Like, imagine if you had an ROI calculator, a financial ROI calculator, and it's like, how much is this going to cost? And all you had was just, big, medium, low, medium, or high. And that's all you could put in there. That's not going to fly. Well, that's how that feels emotionally. It's like, well, this is a small effort. This is big. This is huge. But they don't know how to wrap their heads around it. So the question is, how do you bring clarity to the amount of effort and time it will take to procure? And we could dive into more of this if you want, and then the time to implement. I was talking about this once, and I don't know if you guys remember the movie Contact with Jodie Foster.
Of course, of course.
And the aliens were in this like foggy, murky, I don't know what it was, but every now and then you got to see this big tentacle sort of come out and slap the screen, and it freaked everybody out, right? And the thing that made it so intriguing, which is always true, is the aliens, you don't get to see them clearly, but that's why you're afraid, because once you can see it clearly, you might be afraid, but at least you know what you're dealing with, right? And then you can make a plan. Until you can see it clearly, you can't make a plan. And so I used this example once when I was talking about this, because I think it's a great example of how our buyers feel. they see this big murky thing, and they know it's big, and they're excited because they see the value. They have all these emotional benefits they're weighing, and they're thinking, wow, this is going to be great. I'm going to implement this. It's going to be so good. We're going to have all kinds of efficiencies and productivity, and this is going to be good for my career. But man, that big murky thing, I don't know. I'm kind of scared. And if you think about the buying process, they're in this phase of fear, right? They've decided they want to buy themselves personally, but they are afraid of all kinds of things. And so the answer to fear is clarity. So how do you get clarity to the buyer as quickly as possible? And again, this goes to things like implementation guides that are very specific. And I have examples on the website. By the way, anybody who wants to can go to buyerenablement.io and download free all the downloads that come with the book. You can download them free, whether you have the book or not. And one of them is a sample implementation guide. And as an example, it says, you're going to need these kinds of roles to get involved. You're going to spend this many hours for the next 3 weeks, most likely doing X, Y, and Z. And then it'll move to this stage, and you're going to need to spend this amount of time. Because what we do is we say, here's the amount of time you're going to have to spend at these phases. Can you do that?
Yeah.
And then they say, well, gosh, man, I've got these big projects. And then, so this whole thing comes around to not only helping them make that financial ROI, the emotional ROI calculation and come out on top, but you're actually also really setting up for a successful outcome, because of course, the more clarity you have, and that of course is what you and your own business really wants, is that successful implementation where the value happens. And so you just got to bring all this clarity to the conversation before it ever happens. And that's the answer, I think. And to this emotional ROI question is, how do you bring up the emotional challenges that are going to happen and talk them through it and help them understand how to analyze that calculation.
So powerful. And you said so many things there that I want to double click on. And
sorry, I was talking for a long time. I felt like, I should shut up now.
that was really good. Well, and just so many thoughts run through my mind. First of all, I think one of the biggest mistakes that sales professionals make is they try to sweep that under the rug. Right? Yes. They want to ignore all that and just hope and pray that we can just get to the sale. Let's somehow convince them and get to the sale, and then we'll worry about that stuff later, right? And I think the reason they don't put it on the table is because they're afraid that that's what's going to kill the deal. And in fact, just the opposite is true, right?
Right. It's more likely to kill the deal if you don't talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the organizations I worked with for a number of years, it was a high-tech organization, and salespeople would come to me and say, well, Chris, they're telling me that this sounds difficult. And my response to them was, it is difficult.
Because it's true.
They're going to have to, they're not just investing money, they're investing time, they're investing effort, they're investing making changes in the organization. We need to address that head on and let them know. In fact, explain to them that only those organizations that are committing to making a change and committing to doing something different are the organizations that are going to be successful. And if you're not in a position to we're not talking about just investing money, but at the end of the day, nothing's accomplished without investing effort and time, right? So it's up to you. Do you want to get to this land that we believe we can, this quote promised land that we believe we can get you to or not, right? And again, that comes back to I'm not here to force you into this program. If you aren't willing to make the investment in time, right? Yeah, then maybe we shouldn't be talking, right? And that completely changes the game.
Yeah, it goes back to that you have to put your need to close the deal aside, in service of what is going to be best for them. And in the end, they're going to respect that. That builds so much trust. If they can't implement effectively, if they can't lead the change management, all you're doing is getting some really bad revenue that's going to hurt your company's reputation. And if it gets postponed 6 months because that's when they can actually do it well, that's really disappointing. But you'll have a much better outcome. They'll have a better outcome, in that process. So
100%.
I think though, one other thing I'll say on this topic is they have to have a belief that their reputation's going to grow, that it will make them upwardly mobile, that it won't put their current projects at risk, or if that it is, that those risks, that if they do, that it would, that those risks are manageable, and that it's not going to hurt their outside relationships, right? And so kind of another angle, a way to look at it is just, how do you help them believe that's true? Those things are true. They have to have the feeling. Again, emotion's all about the feeling, not so much the facts, even though the facts lead to it, right? That clarity of fact leads to the emotion. And so it's, how do you help them believe that those risks, the benefits outweigh the risk, and that it's more likely that a successful outcome is likely. Yeah.
I love the fact that you brought up the word beliefs, and this is something that I talk with sales professionals and sales leaders all the time, and that is, what is it? Stop focusing so much about, quote, selling your products and selling your features and your functions. Ask yourself, what do they need to believe in order to become convinced themselves that your solution is the right solution? And what potential competing beliefs are the beliefs that will stand in the way of them moving forward? The more we think more in terms of, because what do beliefs drive?
Action.
Behavior.
Exactly.
Action.
You don't
decisions.
do anything you don't believe. You have some reason to do it. You believe something. And it's a very interesting exercise, by the way, in all aspects of life, to look at your own behaviors and ask, why did I do that? We had this conversation once in our family, like, why do I turn on the light switch? Well, because I believe that the light's going to come on. I believe in the power of electricity. I believe that the light switch is connected by a wire to the electrical grid. It's like all this stuff. Everything we do is connected to some belief. So anyway, it is interesting. And you're definitely right that if we focus on that, what it is that they believe or what's prohibiting them from believing, I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. And getting back to what we were talking about, which is focusing too much on just getting the sale done over focusing on what's in the best interest of the customer, and how can we just focus on getting them to a desired outcome. The reason we do one over the other comes back to beliefs, right? We believe that we will be more successful as sales professionals if we just by the way, sales management is part of this problem, right? And that opens up a whole new, other can of worms. But at the end of the day, it's beliefs. Okay, fabulous conversation. Garin, let me just push pause just for a moment. Folks, if you've just joined us, I'm speaking with Garin Hess. He is the author of a book called Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder. He's also the founder and CEO of Consensus. And we're just talking all things buyer enablement and the book. We've had a number of people say hello. By the way, Jason Zekowitz has shared a few comments. Jason, nice to see you as well. Thank you for sharing. If any of you do have any questions for Garin, or if you just care to say hello, please feel free to do so. Garin, believe it or not, we've been at this for 40 minutes already, and I don't even think I've scratched the surface on some of the things I wanted to ask you. So we will cover as much ground as we can. You're a busy man, so I'm not going to keep you too long. We've talked a little bit about how buyers think. We've talked a little bit about this idea of emotional ROI, which I does. And look, at the end of the day, people do make purchase. I believe, and science has proven, people make purchase decisions emotionally, and then they justify with logic, right? That's the way the brain. All decisions, originate in the limbic portion of the brain, which is the part that drives emotion, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about, quote, what buyers want. Chapter number 3, you elaborate on what is it that buyers want. Do you care to share some of the things that rise to the top for you?
Well, so I'll have to refresh my memory glancing through the book a little bit. But I guess the first thing I'll say about this is we think we are more important in our buyers' minds than we are. At least we want to be more important.
Right.
And if you think about their universe, they've got their job. At the core, they've got their personal life, their families, their friends, their faith, perhaps other activist kind of cause they might be interested in, just very deep-seated sorts of things that are driving their purpose in life. And then they've got their own jobs, the political things that are happening, the projects and deadlines and all of these things. And, and way outside of all of that, like rings on or planets around the sun is the vendor who's trying to get them to realize they need to make a change. So I just think as we get into this, what do buyers want? We need to think about just their perspective. I almost called the book, this is early on, I shouldn't say almost, it kind of killed this title early on, but one of the titles I was thinking about was Into the Buyer's Mind. Because it's really trying to put yourself in their shoes. I have a little section on buyer empathy, which is how do you put yourself in their shoes and really try to understand what they're thinking about, what do they want, what do they need. So a few things that I mentioned in the book. They want to feel heard, which, by the way, there's this car dealership here in Utah, which I won't mention because I don't want to get some defamation lawsuit or something. But they have these big these big billboards, and it says, "We hear you." And they've done this for about 3 years now. They have oversized ears. They have all kinds of very clever billboards about "We hear you." Which they obviously know that buyers, even car buyers, want to be heard. I've purchased a car from them, and unfortunately, they don't live up to their billboard. And I've actually ended up purchasing two over the years. One before they started this campaign, and once a couple of years after they started this campaign. It was exactly the same. You don't feel heard at all. It was a very frustrating process. And so my point of bringing that up is, they want to feel heard. They don't want to just feel heard. They want to be heard. They first need to feel heard, but they also need to be heard. And the way that you can show that they're being heard is you actually take action or listen and do things because of what they've said. So a couple of other things that we've already talked about. They want to be educated rather than sold to. So I won't touch on that too much. But one of the things that I think buyers really want is authenticity. They want to engage with real people that are genuinely interested in their problem that they're trying to solve, genuinely interested in them to some degree. Not all buyers want to have, a deep relationship with whoever they're connecting with in terms of sales, but they still want to have a feeling they're talking to an authentic, genuine person. And so much of what the buyers are really doing, and again, this is often subconscious, is they're evaluating the company based on the experience they have with, the SDR, salesperson, sales engineer, and
the individuals.
The individuals. And we are the face of the brand, and anything that we do reflects. So a typical example is if they feel like the buying process is easy, they will believe more likely that the implementation will be easier.
Absolutely.
It's never easy. But on the other hand, even if your implementation is really straightforward and has very positive outcomes, but you make the buying process hard, they will think this company is going to be hard to deal with. This product is going to be hard to use. And it has nothing to do with the reality of that. So I guess my point in saying that is that buyers want this authenticity. They want to be educated, all in service of wanting to believe that your company can give them what they want, how they want it, which is, a product and a company that's going to back up that product or solution in a way that will meet their needs and for years to come. So, yeah. So those are a few thoughts.
Well, and in doing so, we're addressing one of the things we were talking about a moment ago, which is the foundation or the basis of this emotional ROI and the risk that they are putting on the line, right?
Yeah.
So the more that we can demonstrate that empathy, the more that we can be authentic, the more that we can demonstrate the fact that you are sincerely the priority in this interaction.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a commission tied to this interaction if we decide to do business together. But that is secondary to helping you and demonstrating for you how we can achieve and help you achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's the bottom line. We got, Garin, we got a question from Shamil here. How, if you read through it, the question is, how do you avoid the trap of enablement/training versus outcome-focused sales demonstrations? I think this is an important one because, as you're saying, prospects want to be educated. They want to be informed. They want to be guided.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'm the first to point out, if you're giving a demonstration, it shouldn't feel like training on how to use software, right? We should be demonstrating outcomes. So there's a fine line between educating and informing versus something that feels like training.
Absolutely.
How might you respond to Shamil's question?
Well, it's a really important question. It's not just in the expansions. To your point, Chris, it's even in the initial buy. Sometimes we can get into this. I'm going to show you how, here are the 20 steps to
click here, click there,
reconcile your inventory or whatever it is in the system that you're doing. And, and so what I recommend, without diving into a totally different topic, is to go to goconsensus.com and look for the 6 demo types and where they belong. Because I asked myself this very question as I was coming up with this analysis back. It was about 3 years ago, and is this question basically? And there's a webinar out there, by the way. I spent a whole hour on this topic because what you have to do is you have to understand the buying process, and this is true whether it's initial sale or expansion sales. In fact, I've been thinking about writing another book, a follow-on book that focuses on buyer enablement post expansion. Post initial purchase.
Post onboarding.
Buyer enablement's still very similar, but it does shape.
100%.
It does shift in its shape. I'll say that. But when I was doing this analysis on the 6 demo types, I was kind of asking this question at the very beginning: what do buyers need? Marketing, highest level. Hey, hit the website for the first time. Well, all they really need is problem. We know your problem. We have the solution, and here's the benefit you'll get from it, right? Problem, solution, benefit. It's like the vision. Yeah. Oh, wow, you understand my problem. I get it. But as soon as they believe that you understand their problem, that you have a good solution, potentially, they want to start getting into details. And this is where it can get challenging, because how much detail should you give them versus how much do we stay focused on this outcome-based discussion? And the way I think about demos is really it's solution or product education for the purpose of making a confident purchase decision. So it really is a type of education, but it is not training for how to use the software. And this is where you have to constantly ask yourself, what is my training purpose? I am educating, yes, but what am I educating for? It's to make a confident purchase decision. What is the minimum amount of product I can show or solution I can show and demonstrate to help them make a confident purchase decision? That's the question, I think. What is the minimum amount? And so in the 6 demo types, I kind of go into what are the buyers really trying to get at each stage of the buying process, and how does that line up with how much product they want to experience or see? And so I think that's what I would recommend in short, is go out and watch some of that 6 demo types content, because it'll help get your juices turning. And of course, you have to apply it to your own organization, but I think it would help point you in the right direction.
Well, and I love the fact that you brought up this idea of demonstrating the minimum amount of product. I don't know if you recall a term that I, at least I'd like to believe that I coined, called the MVD, the minimum viable demo.
Oh, I don't.
And
Yeah,
and I
that's
actually
awesome.
did I actually
Minimum
did a
viable.
webinar. I actually did a webinar with some of the folks at Consensus on the idea of the MVD applied to each of the 6 demo types.
I love
And
it.
that's a webinar that's also on the Consensus website. So that webinar is
I
out there as
unfortunately
well.
did not see that webinar. I'll have to go watch it now. But just to underscore how important this kind of content is, and is Gartner has now recently come out with some research called the 5 archetypes of demonstrations, and well, the research title is something like tech CEOs must align types of demos with buying stages, or something like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they've actually come out with their own research that, I think they've picked up on some of the stuff that we were all talking about, but they've come up with their own article. So that they've come up with 5 types of demos at different stages of the buying process. So, I mean, this is something that's really gaining hold, that they're a different type of demo, or like you say, I love your MVD, minimum viable demo, that you can give at what stage of the buying process. And this goes to understanding, what do the buyers need? What questions are they asking, and what problems are they trying to solve? What tasks are they trying to get done at that stage of the buying process? Because if you don't understand that, you're going to give them the wrong demo.
Bingo. Yeah. No, it's great. And it's interesting. I'll have to after the fact, I'll have to send you. I've literally got a slide that sort of is sort of a journey through the buyer's journey, the buyer's process, and the types of questions that they may be asking along the journey.
I love it.
And then the demos that we should be, or the conversations that we should be queuing
engaging
up,
them with. Yeah.
Precisely.
Well, that is exactly, that is buyer enablement to the T, because you're understanding, what does this process look like? To the buyers, it's a nebulous journey, but you see it from here, and they need to get to here. Here's all the things they need to go through, and what are they thinking about? What do they need? What kind of questions do we need to ask? What conversations do we have? So I think that kind of content going to be super helpful for people just getting into buyer enablement. Where can they find that content from you, Chris?
So anybody can go to techsalesadvisors.com. And in fact, we put together a spreadsheet or a grid on the concept of the NVD for each of the 6 demo types. Cool. And that's actually a download on the website as well. So cool. Under the resources page. So yeah, and that's probably something you and I, we should probably, after the fact, we'll have to collaborate a little bit more on.
It would be good. Yeah. It sounds like, I'm sorry I missed that webinar, but I'm glad you did that.
We have to merge our minds. Garin, let me press our pause button again, just very, very briefly, folks. I'm speaking to Garin Hess. He is the author of Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder. He's also the founder and CEO of Consensus. Believe it or not, Garin, we've been at this almost 55 minutes. I try to keep these to an hour, and I feel like you and I could go another hour. I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about Deep Sea. I don't think we're going to get there, so maybe you'll block off some time in the next 6 months or so, and we can just talk about Deep Sea. Sure. What I would like you, and by the way, Chris Pompilio, he's been another guest on this show. Loves the idea of the MVD. Chris, nice to see you. Thanks for chiming in. I did want to give you just a minute before we wrap things up, Garin. I would love for you to take just a minute and talk a little bit about, and I know you're not always comfortable doing this because you're a very modest individual, but I would like to just have you share a little bit about how is Consensus helping organizations become more of a buyer enablement thinking organization, and how are they leveraging technology to enable buyers?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that. I try not to get in the sales mode much and just really like to educate, right? And I love to learn and I love to share what I learn. So, but one of the things that we think about when it comes to consensus and buyer enablement is just this idea of, and I mentioned this in the subtitle of the book, it drives digital sales, right? Well, what is digital sales? Well, in the very lightest form, you say, well, it's just putting all your materials online and now we have digital sales. But really what it's all about is it's helping the buyer get access to exactly what they need at the right times in their buying process when they want it, whether they want it at 3 a.m. or 11 at night. And this goes not only for them, but all those stakeholders that get involved, right? And so many people's many organizations think that the answer to this is a deal room where they pack it full of stuff and then say, here's a link to all your stuff. And I'm not saying that's not somewhat helpful, but what buyers talk about and report when engaging with those kinds of rooms is it's overwhelming because it's just full of all this stuff. So what we are really focused on, and this is what we should be focused on as buying coaches, regardless of whether it's consensus or you're just doing this all manually, is giving them just what they need at the right stages. Really what we've been talking about recently, with the 6 demo types, or it's understanding the process and giving them just what they need when they need it and anticipating ahead of time. So the way this looks with consensus is demo automation software that helps accelerate the process because you can build these reusable demos. Sales engineers build the reusable demo, a library, and then they provide it to sales, and then sales can send that out on demand to the champion. And the champion, in turn, they answer a few questions up front about what's driving their unique interests, and it personalizes the demo to them, and it gives only them. It's effectively giving the minimum viable demo at that moment, because it will curate not only with the order of the topics, but it eliminates some topics and actually even shortens some topics based on what they're interested in. So then they have that experience. They can share it with other stakeholders, and they can just forward on the link. Every stakeholder in that group is going to get a different experience based on their unique interests. And that's really the goal, is to equip the champion so that they can engage the other stakeholders in a personalized experience, right? That's part of the DC, discovery, engage, equip, and personalize. So another just way I'll put this is the way that it shortens the sales cycle is a number of ways, but one concept we talk about is selling in the gaps. Simple example, SDR reaches out and says, hey, do you want to have an appointment? Yes, I do. Well, that appointment's 4 days from now. Well, there's a gap between the time they commit to an appointment and the time they engage in the appointment. So what do you do during that time? Well, you can send what we call a micro demo. A micro demo, going back to Shamil's question, which is how much should it be product and how much should it be problem, solution, benefit, is mostly problem, solution, benefit, but it still helps. It connects the dots. So a micro demo is built by sales engineering, but it's used with the SDRs or early in the sales process with sales. And so in the gap between the time they set the appointment and the time they have an appointment, you send this out and you say, hey, would you watch this before the appointment? Well, statistics show that if they do watch it before the appointment, they're 34% more likely to become a qualified opportunity. And if they watch it and share it with one other person in the buying process, they're 81% more likely to become an opportunity. So, and you can see how this can shorten the sales cycle. I started this conversation talking about the first time I did this, and it was 12 decision makers got on the call, and I was shocked. I was like, amazing. I don't know what to do. But how long would that have taken to get those 12 decision makers engaged? Right?
Months, more than likely,
Yeah. And so what we're really trying to do is we're trying to automate the things that sales engineers do not want to do. That we want to automate those highly repetitive harbor tour, hey, get on the call. We need a 15-minute demo or whatever it is. It's
right.
So that you can better qualify the buyers. The buyers get what they want sooner. The sales team is able to serve the buyers faster, so they're happier. And as sales engineers, we are able to spend more time on high quality kinds of activities like proof of concepts or prepping for that really important technical demo or
the deep dive demo,
whatever it is, right? Yeah. And so really that's what Consensus is all about. And, thankfully it's really resonating and working really well. We're seeing across our customer base, the kinds of results that I often used to just dream would happen when I was envisioning it at the beginning. And, we're helping to free up about 10 to 12 hours per week for a sales engineer to allocate to other things. The sales cycle is getting shorter. And surprisingly, also the close rate improves. You would think in some ways that, if we're automating more of this stuff, then maybe the close rate is going to get more difficult. But because they're moving faster through the process and they get what they want faster, that it impacts the close rate as well.
Well, and ideally, you're bringing us really a service to the industry, which is you're making it easier for buyers to become informed and to reach consensus, right?
Yeah,
there's a higher purpose here, which is making the process of buying enterprise software.
That is our mission in life. Is buying enterprise software is too slow, is too complicated, and it's too painful. And our goal as a company is to make the process of buying enterprise software easier, faster, and more pleasant. And what's interesting is when our customers that buy from us, they will often say, wow, the reason we bought from you is because we experienced how we realized that our customers should be experiencing the buying process.
There you go.
That's always music to my ears, because then I know my team is doing buyer enablement effectively.
Right. Yeah, you're eating your own dog food, as we like to say. Right. Fantastic. But by the way, we had another comment from Harley Reed. He made a comment about discovery, and that happens to be the first D, or the first word in your deep C. Harley, thanks for the comment. Garin, my friend, we are literally 2 minutes past the hour, so I'm going to put a bow on the conversation. Thank you so much. This has been great. I do feel like you and I need to do this probably once or twice a year, because I feel like we have so many things to talk about. Any closing comments, any closing words from you, sir, before we sign off here?
Only to say thank you, Chris, for letting me do this. And thanks for those who joined and also participated. It was fun to see the questions pop up. And again, just to remind you, you can go out to buyerenablement.io and get some free downloads. And I do recommend reading the book. It's an Audible form as well. Selling is hard, buying is harder. It's really a lot of research that's there that I think you'll find quite compelling. A lot of data points that are interesting to share with, you'll find interesting to share with your colleagues as well. It's a great read. It's an absolutely great read, and it's elevated the way I think about my own business, frankly, and selling what I sell. So it makes me happy to hear. It's really fantastic. And Garin, you're just such a delightful guest, such a gentleman, so well spoken. So thank you so much for being here, folks. If you hung around, I know this is a long conversation. If you hung around to the end, thank you so much for being here. If you happen to catch the recording, thank you as well. Of course, you can always go to techsalesadvisors.com to see more of these episodes and sign up for the newsletter. Garin, I hope you'll come back and join me. Stick around backstage just for a minute, as I want to give you your parting gift. To everyone else, thank you so much for being here. We will see you next week on Tech Sales Advice. Thanks all. Bye-bye. Bye.